just to give people a little bit of background on the event, so you know where this all came from, and how I got to be sitting up here and how Fleet got to be sitting up here, is that there was a man, he's no longer alive, his name is Ken Wines, W-I-N-D-E-S. He grew up in Bakersfield, California. His father was a professional gambler. His mother was an alcoholic. When he was 12 years old, he started stealing cars. He was a kind of shy boy, but he started stealing cars and getting arrested, and then he'd walk into school and he'd get a lot of acknowledgement for that. Like he'd walk down the hall and he was cool because he was stealing cars. And he hadn't been cool before that. So he said, well, this is a good thing, and he kept stealing cars, and eventually he wound up in juvenile homes and juvenile centers and detention centers from age 12 to 17. When he was 18, he wound up in San Quentin Prison outside of San Francisco in California. He spent time in Soledad, Terminal Island, which are two prisons in California. Eventually, he was sent to the U.S. Penitentiary. It's a federal prison in Marion, Illinois. Marion was the prison that Robert Kennedy built when he was the Attorney General to transfer all the inmates from Alcatraz, because he said Alcatraz wasn't fit for human beings. Ken was sent there. His crimes were completely nonviolent, but he was a big troublemaker. He was a drug dealer back then, 40, 50 years ago. And so anyway, the short of it is he went to Marion. He met the prison psychiatrist, who was a Columbia graduate medical doctor who didn't want to go to Vietnam, so he volunteered for the Public Health Service. And they sent him to Marion to be a psychiatrist. When he got there, he realized everybody was crazy. The warden, the staff, the guards, and the inmates. And he said, I'm not going to spend 4 years in this nonsense. And so he really started to research what he could do in the prison to make a difference. And he created a process called the game. And he had a therapeutic community there with about 40 inmates in the basement of Marion. I actually went there a couple of years ago and visited the room that they were in. And Ken became his protege. One of the things about Ken, and one of the things we'll all learn about to greater degrees, for some of us this weekend, is that we get messages from our parents. And one of the messages Ken got from his alcoholic mother was, you're really smart. So he was a criminal, but he had this message inside of him, I'm really smart. So he met Dr. Groder, who was really smart, Columbia University medical doctor, and he became his apprentice. And Ken spent a number of years learning about himself from this process that we're going to do. And he actually transformed his life to the point where he had 24 years left on his sentence. He was called up before the parole board, and they said, we see no reason to keep you here any longer. And he said, I need to stay for another year because my work with Dr. Groder isn't finished. And they looked at him like he was completely crazy. And he stayed. Then he called the parole board a year later, and he went up and they let him out of prison. And he became a transactional analysis. I met him many years later. I participated in the game, and I was his partner for a number of years, and he trained me to lead this process. And then I met Fleet 10 years ago. Fleet?
No, about 15 years ago.
15 years ago. And Fleet and I are closest of friends, and I would say more like brothers than, well, like brothers. And we decided to become co-trainers of this process. And so here we are as co-trainers of this process. And I think, Fleet's journey began with participating in the event. And then he was a complete natural, like I was when I met Ken. When I met Ken the first time and participated in the game, it was like I was like a trainer in the first training, in a sense. It was just natural for me. And the same thing with Fleet. When Fleet participated in his first training, he was like a trainer already, just a gift, a gift that we had. Just a little bit about so this process has been going on for like 45 years.